So the other day, my wife and I are watching this double feature, Apollo 13 and The Martian. And I notice both films use this same phrase.
Let's work the problem, people.
Come on, guys, keep it together, work the problem.
Work the problem. And I thought, what does this mean to work the problem? I mean, why not just say solve the problem or resolve the problem? Granted, the phrase sounds pretty badass, but I kind of felt like it had some weight to it, some weight that I wanted to better understand. So yeah, let's talk about what it means to work the problem and how it's done. Understand the nature of the problem. Our first clue to what it means to work the problem comes from Gene Kranz in the movie Apollo 13.
Let's work the problem, people. Let's not make things worse by guessing.
Let's not make things worse by guessing. What Krantz means by this is let's make sure we understand the problem before we start throwing solutions at it. Solutions that could make things worse if we don't really understand what we're trying to solve. This means conducting a root cause analysis. A root cause analysis is a structured process designed to pinpoint the fundamental reason, the root cause, behind a problem. While it's often tempting to address the problem as it first appears, those initial observations are often just the visible symptoms of the problem. By digging deeper to identify the underlying factors, a root cause analysis allows you to understand and resolve the core issue rather than just the observable symptoms. Here's how we do this. Step 1. Define and understand the problem. Clearly define what is going wrong and precisely scope the problem, including what happened, when, where, and the risks that the problem poses. This may feel like an unnecessary formality, but the better you understand the problem, the better you can craft an appropriate solution. For example, in this scene from Apollo 13, the crew in Houston are looking at all kinds of indicators. This is good information, but these are really just symptoms of the real problem.
Houston, we are venting something out into space. It's got to be the oxygen.
Step 2. Gather data. Collect relevant information and data related to the problem, including a timeline of events to reverse engineer the issue. Data tells a story, so the more data you have from various sources, the richer the story's narrative will be. This data will also give you the information you need to actually resolve the issue. Or as Mark Watney would say,
I'm gonna have to science the shit out of this.
Step 3. Identify causal factors. Brainstorm potential causes, considering all the possible factors and the relationship between these factors, the relationships that may have contributed to the issue. Some of the things you come up with will end up being non-causal factors, but understanding what didn't go wrong can help point you toward what did go wrong.
Ecom, is this an instrumentation problem, or are we looking at real power loss here?
It's reading a quadruple failure. That can't happen. It's got to be instrumentation.
See, these guys are talking about bangs and shimmies up there. Doesn't sound like instrumentation to me.
Step 4. Determine root causes. Determine the root causes of the problem by using tools like the 5 whys. Now, this step deserves a little bit more of a deep dive, so we'll come right back to it here in a moment. Step 5. Develop and implement solutions.
Flight, I recommend we shut down the reactant valves of the fuel cells. If that's where the leak is, we can isolate it. We can isolate it there, and we can save what's left in the tanks, and we can run on the good cell.
Develop and execute a course of action that will mitigate the effects of the problem and prevent the probability of them reoccurring. It's worth bearing in mind that sometimes an all-out fix isn't really possible. In these cases, the goal is to contain the negative effects of the problem as much as possible until a long-term solution can be put in place.
This is Houston. We need you to power it down immediately, and you're going to have...
Okay, now in step 4, which is determining the root causes, I mentioned the 5 whys tool. The 5 whys is a simple and really straightforward problem-solving method that involves asking why repeatedly, often 5 times, but not always, to uncover the root causes of a problem. Each why prompts a deeper look at the issue, moving past the surface level symptoms and assumptions to identify the true source of the issue. We can see a simplified version of the 5 whys, really only 3 whys in this case, used in Apollo 13 when they're trying to figure out why the glide path is so shallow.
Like we're still shallowing up a bit in the re-entry corridor. It's almost like they're underweight.
Now, how could they be underweight?
We didn't land on the moon.
Rocks?
That's a firm.
This quick exercise allowed them to root cause the issue and come up with an effective solution in no time flat. Understand the resources you have available. Our ability to solve a problem often comes down to our available resources. Resources create options, and options lead to solutions. Thing is, you don't always have all the resources that you wish you did.
And you're telling me what you need. I'm telling you what we have to work with at this point. I'm not making this stuff up.
They're gonna need all these systems, John.
We do not have the power, Ken. We just don't have it.
People who can solve a problem under pressure and understand the resources available to them don't waste time pining for things that they don't have. This brings me to the first rule of resources, which is never discount a resource. Everything is a resource. Just because you can't immediately see how something can be helpful doesn't mean that it doesn't have the potential to be a game changer. Discard nothing. Remember, resources mean options. The most poignant, humorous, and, well, gross example of this is when Mark Watney uses the crew members' fecal matter, their poo, to introduce nutrients to the Martian soil. The second rule of resources is to think of your resources in terms of their functional attributes, not just their intended design function. Just as in you don't want to discard any of your resources, you also want to make sure that you get the most out of the limited resources you do have available. With this in mind, you can greatly magnify your options if you consider your resources according to their functional attributes, not just their intended design functions. As Gene Kranz put it,
I don't care what anything was designed to do. I care about what it can do.
this is how the engineers were able to put together a replacement CO2 scrubber using only the parts available to the crew. Consider the cover to the Apollo 13 flight plan, for example. It was designed to allow the crew to quickly identify the flight plan and differentiate it from other manuals held on board. That was the intended design function of the book cover. However, we're talking about a rectangular, flat, semi-rigid sheet that could be bent into an arching shape.
Okay, we have an unusual procedure for you here. We need you to rip the cover off.
I want you to rip the cover off the flight plan.
With pleasure.
These are the functional attributes of the cover, and it's these functional attributes that allowed the air to flow freely into the inlet of the lithium hydroxide canister scrubby, the filter. The flight plan cover wasn't designed to do this, but functionally, it did the job splendidly. A whole lot better than I could explain it, but yeah, whatever. Okay, so we understand the problem now, we've run a root cause, and so now we can start working it. So yeah, let's talk about how to work the problem. First, focus on one problem at a time. In his book, The Way of the SEAL, Think Like an Elite Warrior to Lead and Succeed, retired U.S. Naval SEAL Mark Devine talks about maintaining what he calls front sight focus, a hyper-focused sense of concentration and single-mindedness on the objective. According to Devine, maintaining a front sight focus has a calming and confidence-building effect. A SEAL knows he must simply engage one target at a time and not shift focus until he has dispatched that target. To do this, he says we should identify a goal and then achieve it by knocking down one target after another, each one the right target for that shot. When you learn to do this with the focus and precision of a SEAL, understanding which targets to engage and how to avoid distractions, your success will skyrocket. This is essentially SEAL hoo-yah speak for what Mark Watney tells a classroom full of students.
You just begin. You do the math. You solve one problem, then you solve the next one, and then the next. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home.
The key is to identify and resolve the most pressing problems, setting them up and knocking them down and moving on to the next, all in the correct order and sequence, one at a time. It's true, there are any number of problems out there screaming for your attention in these high-stress situations, but they aren't going anywhere. You'll get to them soon enough. This is why Commander Lewis orders her crew to take this one problem at a time approach and focus on the most immediate need.
Hang on, it brings the range to 0, but the intercept velocity will be 42 meters per second, and that's way too fast.
Then we'll have 39 minutes to figure out how to slow down.
Another reason we should focus on the most immediate problem is to help us move forward without becoming overwhelmed by the immensity of the ultimate objective. If we lose focus and look at the Herculean task we're trying to accomplish as a whole, we're likely to become disheartened. You don't need to get the Apollo crew back to Earth. Right now, you just need to get them a CO2 cartridge that works. You don't need to figure out how to get Mark Watney off of Mars. You need to figure out how to keep him fed for 3 months.
It has been 7 days since I ran out of ketchup.
Don't lose sight of the big picture. Okay, so you want to focus on the most immediate problem, but you can't do so at the exclusion of everything else. Every solution needs to be evaluated against the ultimate objective, which in the case of Apollo 13 was getting the crew back home safely. You also need to bear in mind that as you solve one problem, you're likely creating a whole new set of problems. Now, this can sound like 1 step forward and 2 steps back, but if it's taking you in the right overall direction, then that's the way to go. Part of working the problem is deciding which risks you can live with and which ones you can't. For example, Houston realizes that the only way for the LIM to conserve power is for the crew to shut everything down, including the flight computer.
13, this is Houston. We want you to close react valves on cells 1 and 3.
We think that closing the react valves may stop the leak.
However, this solution to the problem of power conservation now creates a whole new problem: how to turn the power back on without blowing a fuse or whatever.
Do we know for sure that we can power this thing back up?
It's gonna get awfully cold in here.
Copy that, Jack. We'll just have to deal with that later.
And because they had the resources, and not to mention the time because the crew wasn't dead, they could then figure out the right sequence to power up the ship. So yeah, the solution created a problem, but they knew they could solve that secondary problem. Don't think, what should I do? Think, what can I do? Quite often, you're trying to find solutions to problems that, well, they've never existed before. This means that you need to come up with solutions that have never been tried. This is scary stuff.
Well, I'd have to say that this is the most serious situation we've ever encountered in manned spaceflight.
To do this, don't think, what should I do? Instead, ask yourself, what can I do? By asking yourself, what should I do, you limit yourself to pre-established, off-the-shelf solutions. On the other hand, when you ask yourself, what can I do, you open yourself up to a whole myriad of possibilities. Now, granted, the what can I do solutions contrived in The Martian were pretty nuts, from stripping the MAV, using a bomb to slow down the Hermes, and cutting a hole in his suit so Watney could fly like Iron Man to reach Vogel. But that's what it took. That's what was necessary to get Mark Watney home. Now, yeah, I get it. These are all fictional events. But the Apollo 13 crew had to think outside the box as well, them in Houston. From shutting down the flight computer, using the LIM as a lifeboat, to conducting a manual course correction burn without a flight computer. Maintain composure under pressure. Finally, working the problem demands that we keep our cool and maintain our composure in these high-stress, high-stakes situations. I mean, come on, you know as well as I do that Anxiety and panic can lead to skewed judgment and catastrophic outcomes. It's all about managing and regulating your emotions. To do this, conduct frequent self-checks. Pause, breathe, think, act, as Mark Devine would say, our previous Navy SEAL. Even if time is of the essence, taking a moment to gather yourself helps prevent knee-jerk missteps. In Apollo 13, Jim Lovell is able to keep his head about him well enough to do some pretty fancy, complicated math. Complicated for me anyway, and still have enough wits about him to ask Houston to check his work. As Rudyard Kipling might say, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. So there you go. Practice these techniques the next time you need to work a problem, and you might just come out the other side in one piece. All right, that's all I've got for today. Now, go off and make some trouble, and we'll talk again soon. And it's these functional attributes that allow the air to flow freely. Say that 10 times. Air go in the filter box thing.